I implore you to take the hard way, because nothing stays hard forever. That is a direct quote from Joe DeSena, the founder of the massively popular Spartan race, and it kicks off a pretty fascinating question. Let's dive right into this extreme modern philosophy and ask ourselves, is taking the absolute hardest path always the best way to live? Or, is there maybe a hidden danger in constantly glorifying the grind?
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly fascinating tension. On one hand, we've got the booming modern Spartan brand, an entire empire literally built on grit, burpees, and pushing yourself through the mud. But on the other hand, we have the shocking historical reality of ancient Sparta's total collapse. And spoiler alert, that collapse was brought on by the very rigid, unforgiving rules they absolutely refused to change. We're going to look at what modern endurance athletes get right and what history warns us they might be getting completely wrong.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the modern Spartan movement, subtitled Embracing Discomfort.
So to really understand this modern ethos, we have to look at Joe DeSena's underlying mission. This is a brand born out of the incredibly grueling, utterly unpredictable death race on a farm in Vermont. Today, Spartan's stated goal is to yank 100 million people right off their couches and basically force them to embrace discomfort as a rebellion against modern soft living. DeSena's philosophy is built entirely on these 10 core virtues. He preaches that by mastering things like discipline, true grit, and courage, you can unleash your inner warrior and literally 10x your potential. It is all about relentless endurance. The core belief is that by forcing yourself to do incredibly hard things, you fundamentally transform who you are. Now, to give you an idea of just how far this take-no-prisoners mindset actually goes in practice, DeSena shares a story where he had his pregnant wife walk a mile to the hospital while she was in active labor. She skipped the wheelchair and even took the stairs to her room. The whole idea was that facing the discomfort head-on would actually make the delivery easier, and, well, supposedly it did. But it really shows you the extreme, uncompromising lengths of this modern hard way philosophy. But here is where we hit a really interesting historical pivot. The modern Spartan mission is beautifully democratic, right? It's accessible to anyone, anywhere, who's willing to just get off the couch and push past their excuses. But the reality of ancient Sparta, it couldn't be more different. It wasn't about accessible equality through suffering at all. It was an intensely exclusive, rigidly stratified society built completely on strict wealth rules.
Which brings us to Section 2, Ancient Sparta's Rigid Reality, focusing on the rules of the elite.
Let's rewind the clock about 2,500 years and look at how the original Spartans actually operated, because the reality is quite different from what we see in the movies. Early on, the legendary Spartan lawgiver, Lycurgus, divided the territory into exactly 9,000 equal land allotments, which they called klaroi. The entire goal here was to ensure total economic parity among the full citizens, known as Spartiates. The state-assigned serfs, called helots, actually worked the land so the Spartiates could focus 100% of their energy on military training and discipline. But here's the catch. Just having the land wasn't enough. You had to produce. To remain a full Spartiate, you were absolutely required to use the surplus from your land to pay a fixed monthly quota of things like barley, wine, and cheese to the Syssitia. Think of the Syssitia as these mandatory communal dining groups that enforced a really strict military brotherhood. If you couldn't make your monthly payments to the mess hall, you were in serious trouble. Because that system created a brutal, unyielding path to disenfranchisement. Let's say your land had a bad yield, or maybe you lost it entirely. Suddenly, you can't pay your monthly Syssitia dues. And if you missed those payments, the state showed absolutely no mercy. You were instantly stripped of your voting rights, you lost your military privileges, and you were demoted to an inferior class known as the hypomiones. No exceptions, 0 second chances for just trying hard. Let's look at the fallout in Section 3, the crisis of oliganthropia, or the collapse of a superpower. This brutal inflexibility, their absolute refusal to bend or adapt the rules when times got tough, created a massive demographic catastrophe, one that would ultimately destroy the Spartan Empire from the inside out. The ancient Greeks actually coined a specific term for this self-inflicted disaster, oliganthropia. Coming from oligos meaning few and anthropos meaning man, it literally translates to a fewness of men. This wasn't just some general population decline either. It was a severe, systemic shortage of the full male citizens who were actually qualified to fight and govern.
To put that into perspective, the resulting population drop is just staggering. In the early 5th century BCE, right around the time of the famous Battle of Thermopylae, Sparta had roughly 8,000 full citizens. But because later laws allowed land to be gifted or passed entirely to wealthy heiresses, all the wealth started concentrating at the very top. That meant fewer and fewer men could actually afford those mandatory monthly citizenship dues. By the mid-4th century BCE, the population of full Spartiates plummeted to under 1,000. And the consequences of this were totally fatal. Because of their stubborn rigidity, this self-inflicted wound meant that at the incredibly critical Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, Sparta could only field about 700 elite soldiers. As a direct result, they suffered a crushing defeat by Thebes. The great Spartan superpower was broken, not because their enemies were inherently tougher than them, but simply because Spartan laws were too inflexible to survive. Which leads us nicely into Section 4, Hard versus Smart Resilience, where we'll be synthesizing the Spartan ethos. So, what do we actually do with all this information? Let's bring this fascinating history back to the modern day. We really need to evaluate the true effectiveness of the hard way when we compare it to what actually happened to the real Spartans. Take a look at the perspective of Tony Matesi. He is a former death race competitor, so this is someone who intimately knows extreme suffering. He writes, "Pain without purpose is just punishment. Struggle without strategy is just noise." Matesi is offering this really vital critique of modern hustle culture here. He's reminding us that doing hard things isn't the point. Bleeding just to say you bled isn't the point. Becoming better, actually growing, is the point. So we're left with these two incredibly compelling, completely impartial perspectives, right from our sources for you to weigh. On one hand, we have Decenna's hard way, this relentless push for raw suffering, grinding, and just never stopping. On the other hand, we have Matesi's smart way, a powerful call for intentional, purpose-driven endurance. It prioritizes strategic recovery and making absolutely sure the struggle serves your ultimate goals.
The ultimate takeaway from our deep dive today is this really rich historical irony. Ancient Sparta literally collapsed, eventually turning into little more than a Roman tourist trap, believe it or not, precisely because they stubbornly refused to adapt their rigid rules. They chose the hard, inflexible way, and it completely destroyed them. Modern resilience requires us to realize that adaptability, not blind suffering, is what actually builds lasting strength.
As you map these lessons onto your own physical challenges, your career, or whatever your life goals might be, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. When you face your next massive obstacle, are you pushing through pain for a real purpose, or are you just doing it for the punishment? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.